Okay, so I wasn't really anticipating making this video. I suppose I could call it a follow-up. The initial video I made last night, I was hoping that would suffice, but the violence hasn't really subsided, as far as I could tell. It seems to have spread beyond Ballymena. There's a few things I want to say. If you've just come across my channel, you'll maybe be able to tell from my accent. I am from Northern Ireland originally, and I have touched on my identity and my background in a number of videos, although I try not to make it the central focus because I'm not really into identity politics. But I am from Northern Ireland, and that part of Northern Ireland, Ballymena, I do have connections with. So it's definitely not a part of the world that I'm not familiar with. It's a town that has had social problems over the years. It was once labelled the drug capital of the British Isles. And given recent events, it obviously still has serious social problems. In some of the latest developments, Filipinos in Ballymena have had to put signs on their doors, literally pointing out that they're Filipinos, so they won't be burned out. Um, I I just feel total disgust at the scenes that are happening. Now, looking at the commentary on this, it has to be said a lot of comments are, if not justifying it, saying things like it was inevitable and it's entirely on politicians. I happen to think that rioters are entirely responsible for their own actions. I believe that as a principle in life, generally people are responsible for their own actions. I think frustration at politicians is totally legitimate, but if you make the decision to put on a balaclava and throw a stone at a police officer or put a Molotov cocktail through a window, I say you're entirely responsible for that decision, um, with the possible exception of minors like children who are being having their brains poisoned by adults. Um, I'm going to say something politically incorrect to the right. There's unquestionably a racist component to this, unquestionably. Um, that's the irony. It's sort of become a politically incorrect thing to to point out that there is racism where there blatantly is racism. Do not tell me that it's not racist to target an innocent Filipino family because two Romanians have been arrested over sexual assaults. That's absolute, naked, obvious racism. Because just anyone perceived to be an outsider or an outsider is just targeted. Some have even described it as a pogrom. Now, I don't want to add fuel to the fire, but I'm so disgusted by people who are trying to defend this. It's racist thuggery, pure and simple, because if these people really care about the issue of sexual assaults, um, we'd be seeing this every time there was someone arrested for sexual assault. In fact, there was a 61-year-old white man, local white man from the area arrested earlier this year. It wasn't the same response at all. So I see people saying things like we're protecting our daughters. But firstly, there's this notion that it's only immigrants who are doing it. Now, just to be clear, I think if an immigrant does commit a serious crime, they shouldn't just be arrested, they should be deported. I don't think they should be in this country. That goes without saying. If this, that's just a no-brainer. And I do think the left have been very wrong on this issue to not recognise that. But I also don't believe in cherry picking criminals. I don't believe in saying, well, we're going to turn a blind eye to local thugs and local criminals, but only condemn foreign criminals. Um, if you say that you're against rape, then be against all rapists. Don't just target immigrants who are accused of it. And incidentally, accused doesn't mean guilty. I'm not saying that they are or they aren't. They may well be. And if they're guilty of the crime, they should be punished and deported. I don't think they deserve to be there. But I nothing will ever just no amount of excuses will condone that sort of disgusting mob mentality. I mean, how is this any different really from when you had in the United States in the Deep South at the turn of the century, African Americans targeted because they looked at a white woman the wrong way, and sometimes there were sexual assaults, and sometimes there were rumors. This is what's so dangerous. and terrifying about mob mentality because they don't stop to think for a second, are we getting this right? Is this house that we're burning, is it actually, belonging to rapists? Or is it just because there happens to be immigrants in the street, so we're going to burn them all out? I am so, I just find it repulsive. And incidentally, knowing Filipinos, the chances are they're in jobs like nurses, doctors, particularly nurses. The very sort of people who would be treating rioters if they got injured by the police. That's what's so disgusting. And I'm sure it's not just Filipinos that have been targeted. I do take that personally because, like I say, I've got connections to that community. Um, I want to be a little bit cautious about going into too many personal details for obvious reasons, but I am so, so, so sick of people defending rioters. I'm angry about a lot of things, but I don't go out and set someone's car on fire. That there's no excuse. There's none. I haven't looked at the GB News coverage, but if it's anything like last year, no doubt they'll say, "Oh, the violence is bad," but these are just fed up citizens. They're criminals. If you're rioting, if you're throwing stones at the police, if you're burning people out of your homes, you're not you're not a citizen exercising your democratic rights to protest. You're a thug and a criminal. Now, parties across the board, unionists and nationalists, have condemned the violence. There's been talk of other police forces possibly having to move in. I hope that doesn't happen. I hope it de-escalates. I hope far more arrests are made. The last time I heard, there was only 6 arrests made. Well, it's clearly a lot more than 6 people getting involved in the violence. I support the police service of Northern Ireland 100%. They've had their lives threatened. They've been injured. Their officers are on the front line dealing with a rabid mob. I'm absolutely with them on this. And incidentally, it's worth pointing out that the 2 teenage boys who were accused of the sexual assault are in custody. So it's not like they've just got away with it. Hopefully they'll face trial, and if they're guilty, they will be punished. And it isn't just one sexual assault. Apparently, there has been 3 in recent weeks. So there is obviously a problem. And I'm not stupid. Obviously, people are going to use that as an opportunity to latch onto it and say our daughters are under threat. Um, The only people I would have a modicum of sympathy with is like fathers or brothers of the girls. But others who are just sticking their nose into it and saying we're going to get involved in this violence, that's not peaceful protest. It's just not. And they say, oh, well, we do it because politicians don't listen. No, I think you're doing it because you want an excuse to do it. If it was really about justice, if it was really about the problem of sexual assault, they would be doing this every time it happened. They cherry pick. That's the problem, and that's why I don't really buy the excuse that they're just fed up. They've just had enough. I think they are genuinely angry. I think they've worked themselves up into that because they want to convince themselves that it's only immigrants who commit crime. It's only immigrants who do these things. That clearly isn't the case. Um, so I must admit I've got short patience with. I'm not talking about people who say who are open and adult enough to acknowledge that there's no excuse for mindless thuggery. But what really troubles me is a lot of people aren't even bothering to do that. They're even denying that there is violence going on. That's insane. There clearly is. There was a leisure centre in Larne targeted. This has spread to other towns in Northern Ireland. It's disgusting. In one case, I heard about a Ukrainian mother who had fled that awful situation, and then she's dealing with this. How perverse and sick is it to say that you're standing up for women and girls by terrorizing women and girls? So I'll wrap this up, but the whole thing's made me depressed and angry and disgusted. There is a debate to be had around immigration, and definitely immigrants who commit crime in this country should be deported without question. Politicians need to understand that frustration. I am not in a bubble when it comes to the sort of problems that come about from immigration, particularly when it's concentrated in deprived areas. In fact, a few years ago, I think it was in the 2015 general election, Nick Clegg then the leader of the Liberal Democrats, made a good point. He said, when you have a concentration of immigration in socially deprived areas, tensions build up. That wasn't coming from reform. That wasn't coming from the Tories. That was Nick Clegg, leader of the Liberal Democrats. He was right about that. And I do think some mainstream politicians have been guilty of being a bit oblivious to the problem. Um, but calling out racist thuggery for being racist thuggery is not inaccurate. They're not good citizens. You know, burning out, firebombing the home of a Filipino family because Romanians have been arrested over sexual assault, that's nonsensical. It's absolutely racist thuggery. And I don't care about right wing political correctness. That's what it is. I'm calling it out. And if the Prime Minister says that in this context, he's absolutely right. Now, there's a lot to be said about two-tier justice in Starmer's Britain. Um, and you do see many examples of it. I've been extremely critical of the police overuse in non-crime hate incidents, for example. I don't think someone should go to jail or have six uniformed officers knocking on the door because they've said something politically incorrect online. Incitement to violence is different. And incidentally, when people say, oh, it's just words, look at a situation like this. If you have people, and I absolutely guarantee, because of the presence of social media, there will be bad actors out there right now on X and elsewhere trying to stoke the flames of this, coming out with rubbish about the Irish are fighting back, ignoring the fact that it's a unionist area, so they'd resent being called Irish, but that's beside the point. Um, I mean, if they want to take that mentality, I mean, it's a unionist community anyway. But if they want to take this attitude of the Irish fighting back, there was violence in Dublin last year, in a similar context. Um, in the 1970s, there were signs in England saying no Irish. There was racist anti-Irish sentiments because of the Troubles. So racist Irish seem to have a short memory because they themselves are victims of racism. So it's a pretty short memory. Um, I'm just disgusted by the whole thing. I mean, I just don't think this is really about justice or really about um, wanting to protect teenage girls in the area. I saw another post incidentally that was notable: the number of women who are affected by domestic violence in Northern Ireland. How many of these thugs who are rioting and terrorizing immigrants really care about that? I wouldn't be half surprised if half of them beat up their girlfriends. I wouldn't be half surprised if a lot of them are supporters and fanboys of Conor McGregor, the MMA fighter who's an absolute POS, and a rapist. So that's why, forgive me if I don't really believe this is about a moral outrage against rape. It's cherry picking criminality. I appreciate not everyone watching this will agree with me. Some of you might be subscribers. I've had a few conversations with some of my subscribers on this, and I know you won't entirely agree. But from my point of view, I take it personally when I see Filipino families targeted, because, like I said, it's people in my life important to me. That could be them. That could be them. So I do take it personally. Um, I've also lived in a rough area, and I know what it's like to be on the receiving end of a mob. Put it that way. So nothing will ever make me feel sympathetic to a rampaging mob in that sense, Incidentally, it's mostly men. Notice that. Some women are involved, but it's like I say, where's their outrage against domestic violence in Northern Ireland? Absolute hypocrites. That's the thing I find perhaps most galling, the total hypocrisy. I just don't think this is really about justice. I think they're using what happened to the girls, just like Southport last year, as an excuse for mindless hooliganism. I mean, rioting's almost a sport in Northern Ireland, and there's teenage boys in Northern Ireland will find any excuse to riot. Someone on the internet said that these girls in our town were raped, so let's go out and terrorize some immigrant family. I think that's the mindset that's going on. Um, there really isn't much more to say. I just hope the situation can and de-escalate. I hope arrests are made, and I hope there are tough punishments, because if there isn't, it sends out the message that this sort of thing will be tolerated, that it will be acceptable. Anytime you're angry with the government, you could just go out and set a car on fire. I hope there's hefty prison sentences. I hope those who tried to set the homes on fire get long prison sentences, because it's attempted murder. I hope they get long prison sentences. The ringleaders, I'd put them away for 10, 12, 15 years. It's attempted murder. You know, it's not a trivial thing. It's not just expressing frustration. This is extremism. Um, I mean, anyone who wants to justify this, try putting yourself in the shoes of the families who've had to board themselves up, who are, you know, living in fear that if they go outside they'll be killed. Try putting yourself in their shoes. But you know, I think it's a waste of time trying to see get those people to see reason. I'm not talking about people who condemn the violence, but say, but there is a problem with immigration. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the people who defend it. I have no respect for that argument. I think honestly, it sickens me. So I'm with the police service of Northern Ireland. I hope arrests are made. I hope those responsible for the initial rapes are punished, of course. But saying that, you know, this will keep happening if politicians don't listen. So is that the position with all crime? Or are you just cherry picking which crime you're angry about?